Java Remote Method Invocation, or Java RMI, lets us distribute Java object instances across the network on different machines. And then we can invoke them from our local machine in a way that's semantically equivalent to invoking a Java object instance that's right within our own local address space. So in this tutorial, we're going to go over the basics of using Java RMI to remote part of a Java program across the network. But before we dive into the details, let's first take a look at how Java RMI is organized from a high level. So this diagram here shows the general architecture of a Java RMI application. On the top left here, you'll see the client program, and it's going to invoke methods across the network that are hosted in objects residing in this server program. So the dotted line, the vertical dotted line, gray line that we see here is basically denoting a machine boundary. So we're going to use RMI to invoke objects across this machine boundary. Before we can do this, however, we have to first start this process called the RMI registry. The RMI registry is the element that helps the servers that are actually hosting the remote objects advertise their availability to the clients. So similarly, clients will use the RMI registry to actually find references or obtained references to the remote objects that they want to invoke. Now the interfaces that are defined by these remoted objects involve objects of many different types, and they can also return objects of many different types. So we see these two servers down on the bottom. Because the client might introduce derived classes on those parameter types that are defined by our interfaces that the server is not aware of, we need to make those class implementations available to the server. So that's why we have this server over here on the left associated with the client. It's basically exposing these class implementations via various URL protocols like HTTP or file URLs or what have you. And similarly, the server might introduce new types on those objects that are being returned or referenced by these interfaces. And so we also have a server over here on the left that we're associating with the server program. So in the tutorial that follows, we're going to be running both the client and server on the same local host just to keep things simple. So we're just going to be using file URLs here. But keep in mind, if we actually distributed our client and server across the network, that we could easily host these class files on web servers or HTTP servers somewhere. So building an RMI application is quite straightforward. First of all, what we need to do is define the interfaces of those objects that we're going to host on a remote process somewhere on the network. And then we need to actually implement those interfaces. So these would be the object implementations that our server is going to host. And then finally, we need to implement the code, the client code, where we actually access those remote services. Once we have the implementation done, we can run it also in just a three-step process here. So first of all, we need to run that RMI registry that we referenced earlier. Once that's up and running, we can run the server, which will then register with the RMI registry. And then finally, we can run the client, which will connect to the RMI registry to actually locate the server. So in the tutorial that follows, we're going to be doing our demonstration using Eclipse. And there's a wonderful RMI plugin available at www.gennady.net. And this plugin we've found dramatically simplifies your life. If you're a beginner to RMI and you want to use Eclipse, this will make your life a lot easier. And it's available, there's a free downloadable eval copy that you get for 2 weeks. And the licensing fees themselves are very reasonable after that. If you're a student, you can get it for free. And it's very inexpensive for anybody else that doesn't fit that category. We're going to begin our tutorial with an existing program. This is a very straightforward program. We have a client program that simply prompts the user for a integer value, and then it's going to go and compute pi out to that many decimal points. And we compute pi by creating an instance of this object that we call pi. And pi is just going to, it has a method called compute that's just going to use some functions in the Java math library to compute pi. So we've got some computations that are implemented in this class. But then we define an interface, and this interface is what we're going to use to actually wrap this in a server. So right now I have a server class out there which simply calls this interface and executes it. And right now, if we go back to our original code here, everything's implemented in process. Okay, so if I run this application, it's just going to instantiate the pi computation and the server right here in process. But what I really want to do is actually take this computation and remote it. I want to run it on a different machine using Java RMI. So let's take a look at how we can accomplish that.